All right, record on. Okay, I will. Jason, would you start and introduce yourself? That would be great, panelists.
Hi, good day, everyone. Jason Owen. I have been blessed to be a part of the Full Circle organization as a board member for the better part of 2 years now, and just really look forward to the conversation today. And thanks to everyone for taking your time at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, also known as Friday Eve. Thanks.
Excuse me, I can't see you at all. A screen came on and covered up your face. Is there anything you can turn off there that would allow me to see your face?
How about still the issues? Anyone else having the same issue or?
No, is it the screen that said recording was in progress?
That this says this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant.
Right,
And then
you have to click on
on.
you have to click on guided to get that to go away.
I don't know where that is.
You probably have to scroll up a little bit. It's towards the bottom of that screen. That
Oh,
pop.
thank you. I've got it.
All right.
There you are.
Thank you. All right, Keith, you want to go ahead?
Yes, good evening. My name is Keith Lewis. Been part of the Grief Circle family since 2020. Both my wife and I received services from Full Circle after the death of our son. We did the suicide loss support group. We did it separately, but we both received services, and my wife did individual counseling through Full Circle. I think it's a great organization and glad to be a part.
Terry, go ahead.
Okay, I've been involved with Full Circle since 2019 after the death of my youngest son, Elliot. We went through the hands-on healing program at that time, and just piggybacking on what Keith said, it's a great organization and just love the services that are offered for grieving families.
Thanks, Terry. And we're just introducing panelists right now for those of you who just joined us, and then we'll get the discussion started. Adam.
Hey there, I am Adam Carpenter. My wife and I lost a baby in November of 2017. That was our first baby. We got connected, thankfully, with Full Circle shortly thereafter. We did 2 perinatal loss groups over the next, I guess, 6 to 9 months, and kind of got everything back on track. And so we've been involved with Full Circle for almost 6 years now.
Thanks, everybody. And so these are our panelists this evening. So how we're going to sort of schedule the evening tonight is that I have a few prepared questions that I'll ask the panel that we have all come up with together, the panelists and myself. And then I will stop the recording, and then we will open the floor up for discussion, for questions for our panel from the rest of you. But so I will make sure I cut the recording off then. But for now, I'll just ask a few of the questions that we've come up with. Okay. All right. So any of our panelists, if you want to jump in, the first question is, what helped while you were grieving, and what made things more difficult?
Yeah, hey, this is Jason.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm happy. Thanks, Keith. I'm happy to start. So I didn't mention in my introductions, but I like to say that my wife Joy and I have 3 girls. 2 of those girls are still with us, but we still have our third, who we lost to stillbirth in 2011. I actually want to start with what, and maybe I'll defer to one of my partners for what helped during the grief journey. I'll start with what made things more difficult. And for me, it was the regrets of things that I could have handled differently. It was things like not really knowing how to support my family. It was compartmentalizing grief in a way that only a man can. To really sort of hunker down and push through in hopes that somehow just by focusing on the future instead of really living in the present, supporting my family the way they needed to be supported through the journey. Obsessing. I obsessed over things like how we lost Tessa. She was strangled by her umbilical cord in the womb, and obsessing about what actually happened and how it happened and the pain that we all, you know, sort of went through as a result of it happening, instead of focusing on again, I sound like a broken record, like the people in my family who needed support the most, and just feeling helpless through that journey.
For me, in terms of one of the things that helped was having people around me who allowed me to express the feelings that I had and the thoughts that I had. The reason I say that helped is because I think, unlike a lot of men who suppress their feelings and hold their feelings back, that didn't matter to me. This was a traumatic loss, my only child, my only son, and I needed to get out what I was feeling, what I was thinking. And so what helped me was having people around me that allowed me to do that and didn't mind me doing that, because what would have made it more difficult is if people had told me that I couldn't do that. And anybody who tried to tell me that, I just dismissed them and just made sure that I wasn't around them, because I knew what I needed.
In my case, it was the death of my son, who was a senior in college and was killed in a car accident over Thanksgiving break. I needed desperately to have another male that I could talk with who would be able to empathize with me.
Mm-hmm.
And they were few and far between. I knew a man who lost two sons when they were teenagers. And so I thought for sure he would be able to understand. And when I met with him and I told him that I really needed to talk about what I was feeling and thinking. And he very clearly, flatly said to me, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." And I thought, what's wrong here? If anybody could help me, I thought you could. That's what I thought. I didn't say that to him. But there were a handful, maybe not quite that many, of males who would invite me to go have lunch with them or to spend some time just with them one-on-one, that would listen and help me clarify my thoughts by repeating back to me, "I hear you saying, it sounds as if you're feeling." They would use the right words to allow me to begin a conversation. But part of the problem with men, I discovered, seeking out men for help, is that men don't own, I'm speaking in general terms here, but men by and large don't have a feeling vocabulary that's equal to that of women. And so without the vocabulary, they don't know how to talk about feelings. You know? And we are men. We live in a culture where males have been taught how males are supposed to behave. I think that's changing, but over the decades, I'm in my 70s, so over the decades, I've seen that stay in place for too long, where men simply weren't going to share what they were thinking and feeling because they had gotten the message: you need to be strong, you need to get on with this, you need to stay busy. That isn't always what a man needs.
right? Sometimes those feelings, you can't do those things because those feelings get, take
Yes.
priority.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Well,
I think
Any of our other, yeah, Adam, go ahead.
I think a couple just like quick bullet points that helped me, nothing overly deep, but these did help a lot. And obviously weren't put together day one. I think it was learned through the process. One thing that I did, I found a lot of like relief from music. So I literally created a grief playlist. I think 2 of them actually. And so we lost our daughter in 2017, 2018 and 2019. My most played songs were on the grief playlist. So as I was just driving around town, just had that on loop, and it was different things. It was upbeat, slow, it kind of depended on my mood that day. So the music, being outside and specifically like doing something. So like going for a walk or cleaning up the yard. I blew leaves with a backpack leaf blower like nonstop till the grass was sideways. But it was just physical activity, being outside, giving myself that white space of just quiet to like sit and, well, not sit, but to think, right? To have that white space of just, this is where I am right now. Nobody's talking to me, nobody to talk to, and just focus on kind of processing my thoughts. And then I am a learner, so I like to do a lot of reading as well. So, and like I said, this wasn't day one, but as we kind of went through our journey there over the first couple of years, especially, I read a lot of books about men's grief or just grief in general. And then furthermore, as we got kind of further out and started looking to having another child and attempting again, the topic still on grief kind of shifted. And like even one of the books I read was called Option B, and so you start, you see how even the books that I read changed over time as kind of the grief changed.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. All right. We're ready to move on to our second question. So for our panel, what ways do you feel that men, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but already that men grieve differently, and talk about the difference in your grieving compared to your partner, your children, other family members. How did your grief look different? I don't know if Terry, you want to start? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Oh, sure. So I'll say that my wife and I definitely grieved very differently. She grieved in a more stoic way, more stereotypical of how people perceive that men grieve, and I was more vocal about my grief. For a good bit of time, I was really dealing with a lot of the trauma of my son's passing. He passed away in his sleep, and when we found him, I performed CPR on him for 10 minutes before the ambulance got there. And so those like pretty dark visions kind of stuck with me over the course of months. And so like to the gentleman's point who said that men don't have the vocabulary to, or sometimes don't have the vocabulary to support other men, I found that to be true, because people would say things to me to the effect of time heals all wounds. And I think that's just something that people say to placate you because they can't sit there in the moment with you and help you process. Right. And so for me, it was really hard not finding people to process with. Whereas I think my wife, she was more, she's a counselor. She kind of knew how to approach grief in a more effective way than me. But at the same time, she was more stoic, and she didn't really talk about it as often as I did. To Jason's point, I was very much dwelling on the details of my son's passing and not as much on my family at that point in time.
So Terry, if I can jump in for just a second, just to give words to what you just said, the more feminine, I guess, if you will, way of grieving is called intuitive grieving. So people that want to talk about their feelings, want to share their feelings, get strength with other people, witnessing their feelings, encouraging them, that sort of things, crying, that's called an intuitive griever. Whereas an instrumental griever is definitely the more, I guess, associated with male grief. But again, as we've already learned tonight, it can be very, very individualized. But the instrumental grievers, the grievers that you want to do. So like what Adam said, he blew leaves the whole time. You want to do, you want to be active, you want to make those lists. It's often the person in the family that does all the paperwork, does all this, the stuff that has to happen after somebody's passing. It's the, maybe that person that goes back to work a little sooner, and because you just kind of feel like you have to do and stay active. Many times we kind of, in different cases, go to the middle and just more of an integrative. Sometimes even if we want to talk about our feelings, we are the one that has to go to work or do the paperwork after the death, or handle the household task or whatever it is. So we can all go in the middle most of the time, but it usually somebody leans more towards an instrumental griever or an intuitive griever. So I just wanted to add words to add vocabulary to what you just said, Terry. So thank you.
Yeah, and I was very much an intuitive griever. My wife was, to your point, instrumental.
I think
another
women,
thing.
women more easily gravitate towards support groups than men do. It'll take a man a lot longer to make the decision to go, perhaps, on the whole. Once that decision is made, a man can get a lot out of a grief group.
Very much so. Very much so. Thank you. Good point.
One thing,
Adam?
Allison, yeah, Jillian and I noticed that we were like never in the same place, right? Because it's not only, I was absolutely instrumental and she was intuitive. But with that being said, it would ebb and flow, right? There would be times where I would be open and wanting to talk and she would be closed and burn out for the day. And then, obviously that would switch and it would come and go. And very rarely were we in the same spot in our journey. So I think, and that was one of my points that I had later too, but I think that was one of the things that helped, is we were able to identify, and again, she's a trained professional, like you are. And so anyway, we were able to identify quickly, or rather quickly, those differences. And I think that helped us in our communication style to get a better grasp of where each other was, and then try to get on that common ground more often.
Yeah.
I think that could be said in my case as well. The one thing I was so thankful for is my wife and I, without really talking about it, from day one, gave each other permission to grieve the way you need to grieve today. And we didn't judge each other. We just recognized where each other was and let one another be in that place as long as you need to be.
Really great way to put it. Permission to be where you needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Very good way to put it. Keith or Jason, anything you want to add about how people grieve differently?
As my wife carried Tessa for 9 months to full term, she knew Tessa in a way that I did not know Tessa. She carried her, she felt her move. She even in some ways was connected intellectually because of what she experienced, and I didn't have that experience. And so there was a degree of separation there. And I struggled then, and in some ways continue to struggle to bridge that gap. As I said earlier, I am now and have always been able to compartmentalize things. If there's something that I don't want to think about and I want to sort of operate in denial, in order, in the best interest, at least what I tell myself, in the best interest of my family. But she grieved in a darkness unlike anything I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like it, and I didn't know how to help.
Yeah.
I think
Or-
one of the biggest problems by people who care for us, perhaps love us, they want to do something to help us, but 99% of them aren't sure what that something is. And if people could be taught and they could internalize that the two best things they can do is to be present and to listen. And you don't have to know all the words, all the answers. Just be there and listen.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that, I guess, topic, how do you think, for our panelists, how do you think that gender impacted how you communicated, how others communicated with you? And I guess also how the expectations, like the expectations people had on you. So you can answer any part of that question, but the expectations that people had on you because you were male, or because of, the way that the idea they had of how you're supposed to react. So communication or expectations.
I'll jump out there. As far as, I think you said communication, people were afraid to really communicate with me. They were afraid to talk to me about what was going on because they didn't want to upset me. So they weren't sure how to approach me or what to say. I think, especially from those who were co-workers and people who know me know how expressive I can be and how emotional I can be about some things. But from the typical male perspective, they weren't sure of what to do or what to say in terms of talking to me, not sure if they should say anything about my son. They just kind of tiptoed around the subject. And unfortunately, almost 4 years later, there's still some folk who tiptoe around the subject or don't want to bring up the subject or don't want to talk about it. And these are family members who just don't want to bring it up because they either not sure how I'm going to react, or they are afraid of their own reactions because they haven't really dealt with the loss.
I think partly it goes back to something I alluded to earlier, that those people are going to respond to us based on what they've been taught by their parents, by and large. And they never have, it seems, they've never taken an opportunity to look back over their lives and look at what they've learned about grieving throughout their childhood and their young adulthood. And so if they've never looked at that, then they don't know how to respond other than what they remember the way the adults responded to them when they were younger. So it's sad that it's that way, but I talk a lot in some groups I'm in about when we're talking about grieving, I will ask them to think back to earlier periods in their lives when they were grieving, and can they remember anything that happened for them or that they knew to do for themselves that helped them during the grieving process. And once they can get a handle on that, then try to engage or employ those things in your current situation. Sometimes it'll be helpful.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
people just don't like to dwell on grieving, particularly
Grief
men.
is, yep, grief, death, loss, very difficult topic for many people, male, female. It's a difficult topic. So, Adam, did you have something to add about communication? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, it was similar to what Keith was saying, but just an extension of that. I mean, we had certain friends to the communication piece directly. We had, certain friends that fell off, and we've spent, going on 6 years now trying to repair some of those relationships, not all. Some responded in way better ways than we ever would have imagined, and it's interesting. Because the ones that we thought would respond well didn't, and the ones that we never would have imagined would respond in a positive and in an encouraging, supportive way did. And those relationships have stayed strong. But I think just a couple of the things, like when folks don't, well, the first thing is that again, to the communication piece, they didn't obviously say this out loud, but their actions made us feel like they felt that our issue, which was genetic, was contagious. So like if they talked about it, that naturally they would just pick up on it. And so it was more of just like, bury it. I don't want to go there. That's such a terrible situation. My mind can't even think about that. So I'm just going to act like it didn't happen, and hopefully it doesn't happen to me. Or if we talk about it, maybe that'll happen to me. And the reality of it would sneak up on them. So that was one. But the other thing, and you hear it from time to time, but we didn't want to bring up your daughter in case you were having a good day today.
Mm-hmm.
It's our child. We still
Yeah.
think about her, and as we know now, and we have good days, and we think about her. So, those I think led to the feelings of isolation. So again, communication
Right.
that leads to isolation, but it was more of a little bit in what people said, but mainly just the lack of what they said, to be honest.
Yeah. And Keith, I heard you echo the same thing too, is like family members, people not bringing it up, not talking about your son, and Adam, in your case, not talking about your daughter. Like it's that, how do I communicate? And then people maybe don't know how to communicate. So then they just don't say anything at all. So it creates that isolation, like you just said, Adam. So
We still get it today too, and I think again, it's to this exact question. We could talk for an hour on this question only, but to this question, I mean, especially because obviously a lot of my friends happen to be male, and my dad, my brother, I mean, they still act to this day. We have issues with my family specifically where they just do not. I don't want to say they don't acknowledge it. They do acknowledge that it was, it happened, and that we went through that, but they've kind of, moved on, and we've, obviously have learned to move forward and live with our reality, but they've kind of just, again, compartmentalized it and pushed it aside. But again, it's societal expectations in men, that they don't really, or in this case, they, our friends and family, don't show that vulnerable side.
yeah.
And go to those places that typically men just don't naturally go together.
Yeah.
And I think to add to that, in my case, because my son died by suicide, people really are afraid or don't know what to say, or don't want to bring it up because it's such a sensitive, quote unquote, subject. But it's the reality of it. And, that's what happened. We deal with that reality every day, but that's my son. And, it's what happened, but we continue to move forward and not let that control us in the process.
Right. And I think, Keith, we talk a lot about this at our center and in the groups that we do. It's, if people would focus more on how the person lived and not how they died, then therefore maybe that communication and that conversation of, not focusing on how somebody died, but focused on how they touched your life, or the memories that you have, or the funny stories, or that could help communication instead of focusing on the how.
Right.
So Terry or Jason, do you have anything to add about communication or expectations?
The only thing I'll add is that I think it's important for someone who's supporting us to not try to communicate on their terms. So a lot of people would say, hey man, let's go out to a bar and talk. And that wasn't the place I was in after my kid died. So like, I think that was their terms. They wanted to feel like they thought they could be more comfortable in that situation, in that environment. But that wasn't an environment that was best suited for me.
Terry, one interesting thing, because even as just hearing you say that, I'm processing this, but my wife and I, a lot of times, and I felt this too, where people would say like, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know what I want right now. Like 1 minute I want one thing and next minute I want something else. And so there were times where we were like, just do something, whatever. I mean, my mother-in-law just like ordered groceries and had them delivered, and it was half the wrong stuff. Like it wasn't even, we don't eat it. Like it's just, but she just took the reins and did something, which made us feel good. And then, yeah, on the flip side, I can see what you're saying too, where it's like, if somebody takes it and runs with it and it's not what you want to be doing, it's just compounding that the other way. So I don't want to say a lose-lose, it's probably a little negative, but it's interesting that on both sides of the equation, we were sitting there saying, somebody just do something, say something, just act like this really happened. And then you're on the other side saying, don't just come to me with an activity, because this might not be where I am today. Like I'm not interested in, being out in public. I don't want to be there right now.
I'll only add,
Go ahead.
I'll only add that I come from a very fundamentally religious background, and in saying that is no judgment on my background or anyone else's background. I share it because, in my own personal situation, there's always this feeling of grief being affiliated with the person being in a better place, or that there is a silver lining tied to the hope that we have in our spiritual lives, whatever that hope may be. And the reality of it is, in our case, it was one of the worst things that could be said, because it actually made us angry. To think that sort of, how dare you have an expectation, Allison, to your point, have an expectation that we're going to be comforted by that, when that's not what it's about. It's about, as was mentioned earlier, actively listening and showing empathy to the reality of the journey that you're in, and not asserting religious beliefs, regardless of what they are, into the situation.
Just adding on to Jason, your good point. I too got frustrated when people would bring to me the story of Job or Lazarus, and it's like, that's helpful for me to find. That's not helpful for you to give to me in this moment. It seems like you're just trying to placate me with something, and that's not, in my case, it wasn't helpful.
We didn't
Right,
have the
I think
religion.
that.
Go ahead, Allison.
No, I was just gonna say, like, we hear that a lot, both from men and from women, is the platitudes, that, and for it, it's not for us to judge what somebody who is grieving, what is comforting to them. And so it's, and Terry, to your point, somebody's talking to you about religious stories, religious, connotations. They're trying to, make that connection for you. And maybe that would be helpful on Monday, but maybe Tuesday that would not be helpful for you. And so it's like, grief changes every single day, what you need and what you're looking for, and what is resonating with you and what is not. And so, I think that we as individuals have to, take somebody's lead when we're trying to communicate with them or trying to support them in grief, take their lead on what is helping them today, and not think that we have to put onto them what maybe would help us. And quite frankly, nobody knows what will help them unless they're walking in those shoes.
Right.
So, Keith, I'm sorry, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, to Jason's point, my son died by suicide. I mean, I don't have a problem saying that. I am a minister, ordained and all that stuff for years. One of the difficulties for me was being on edge, wondering if somebody was going to question why my son did what he did, or where the good Christian church folks say he is because of what he did. Part of the difficulty for me was, am I gonna have to lay somebody out today because they getting ready to go get crazy with this religious stuff with me because I'm not feeling it, I'm not in that space. I don't need or want to hear that. So that created a certain amount of stress for me in that situation, because I wasn't ready for, felt like I shouldn't have to be ready for what some crazy person was going to say because of how my son died.
What you're speaking to helps me remember that one of the hardest part of grieving is how exhausting it is. It's just tiring. And part of why it's so tiring is that not only we're trying to take care of ourselves, but sometimes with certain people, you feel like you have to take care of them too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very much so. Very
that's
much
just
so.
extra work on our parts. But I can think of an example. Sometimes in our frustration as the grieving person, we blurt out something that the person listening to us doesn't have a clue what to do with. And an example is my wife and I were somewhere, and someone came upon us who knew what had happened, and they wanted to be helpful, I suppose. And well, the wife said to my wife, "Well, don't you just wonder why that happened to you?" And my wife's response just drew a complete quiet. Her response was, "Why not me? I'm not any more special than any other human being." Well, there's truth in that, but that other person didn't have a clue what to do with her at that point. She didn't know how to react.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, well, we have like 2 more quick questions because I want to make sure we have time to open it up for other questions as well. But I just want to touch briefly on the term unresolved grief. And that is when we don't do it's exactly what it sounds like. We don't do the work. We don't do the grief work. We push it down, we avoid, we try to walk around it. And as males, how does that show up? What does unresolved grief look like, and what happens? If anybody has, I see Jason smiling over there. I don't know if you want to start us off, Jason.
Yeah, I've alluded to it a couple of different times, and you're absolutely right. I feel like you're looking right at me and speaking right to me when you're.
I was not at all.
No, in all seriousness, for me, it manifested itself in unhealthy ways, bad habits, anger that I projected to family and friends. I found myself being more and more selfish instead of selfless in the way that I approached my day-to-day life, because I had unresolved grief.
Yeah.
I think in general, some of what Jason touched on, bad behaviors, the anger gets displaced or projected on to other people. Unresolved grief across the board can bring about alcoholism, drug problems, work problems, health problems. Because you suppress all of that, you start having health issues because you're stressed out, you're not dealing with the things that you need to deal with. it is very much a problem, I think, for a lot of men. And it's the struggle for me is how do we reach them, which is kind of why the four of us are together, because we want to reach and be of help or a resource to other men to be able to work through some of these things, so that life can be better. Doesn't mean that the loss goes away. It just means you deal with it differently and you move forward.
Right.
I definitely think it comes out in non-productive ways. Certainly, like you both have alluded to, relationships, and Keith, to your point about substance abuse. But the other thing I think that's important about it, and just, I mean, it can come out in a number of ways, I guess, this particular thought, but it is, you can't selectively mute your emotions. So if you're muting the negative, right? If you're saying, I'm not going to feel my grief, then you're inevitably muting the positive. So you may come off as someone who never seems like they're mad or upset, and they also never seem like they're happy and enjoying the situation. So when you mute one, you're inevitably muting the other one. So
Right.
I feel lucky that I don't feel like I have a lot of unresolved grief. We did find full circle pretty quickly, which really put us back on the right path. But I definitely feel like in those first couple months, I was lost and it could have gone down a really bad path.
I think unresolved grief can impact our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. We can get ourselves in a mess if we haven't gotten some help.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to the good points that are already made is like for me, like I started like thinking through I was going through a stage where like, well, I didn't really enjoy living, and I know I kind of felt like I had to live for those around me. And so there's like a deep depression, and then that depression led to apathy. And then that apathy led to, I think, just anger, right? Just road rage, just random, just anger. And then I think one of the things that kind of helped me was figuring out like a way to honor my son, and that gave me like a mechanism to put the emotion that I had into, like especially the negative emotion, into a bottle that was pointing towards something that could be good. And so like I do think that the unresolved grief can be very, very dangerous. And I think it's something that like it kind of scares me, because there's a couple conversations I think were pretty changing for me, pretty transformative for me, that happened at pretty important times. But like you can quickly devolve into something that into a place where you can't really come back from.
Mhm. Yeah. So what else is helpful? Terry, you talked about something, that was helpful too. Like, what else is helpful? What support was helpful? Coping skills that were helpful? What helped? Because again, we're not in a place where we're going to fix this. We can't fix grief. So what can help, Terry?
So for me, so my wife pointed out this past week that our son Elliot would have finished kindergarten this past last week, right? And that's something I didn't really think of, right? I didn't cross my mind. I know how old he would have been and things like that, but like of course, like this would have been the time he would have finished kindergarten. So one thing I try to do is like I coach my oldest son's sports teams. So I try to coach additional sports teams in his honor, because I tell myself that if he were here, I'd be coaching his soccer team if he played soccer, or his t-ball team. So I just coach different sports teams, that my son's not on, in his honor, just to kind of like, and that's where I can kind of point some of my energy towards is that, and that gives me some measure of happiness, I would say.
Yeah. Doing stuff in his honor. Adam, coping skills, what was helpful?
I don't know where to begin. How long do I have?
Like
Um,
1.5 minutes.
All right, sounds good. So I think the main thing, and I didn't do it, I look back on our experience and I wonder a lot, but I didn't ask for help. And I don't remember who alluded to it tonight. It's hard for men to ask and to do that, but I didn't ask for help. My mother-in-law took the first step in getting us connected with Full Circle, but being in the group, like I said earlier, it was really big on getting us back on the right path just because we got around people who could validate our feelings. They didn't have the exact same experience, but it was very similar. And then understanding that grief changes with time. In those early days, it was just chaos, or even months. And then with time, things ebbed and flowed and it would come and go. And even today, we still experience it in different ways. So, hearing Terry's kind of story there, about coaching and how old his kid would be and what grade they'd be finishing. Now we look around and we start seeing people our age who are pregnant with their second or third kid. And here we are with our, one living child. And so again, just acknowledging that it changes and it's not going away. And that it will continuously, change and evolve. And so we just need to be prepared to stay in touch with it and where we are and continue to develop the skills to not overcome it, but to live with it.
I think we are living in a time when there's so much grief on so many fronts, from the horrible weather we're having at times, the illnesses that people are experiencing, the loss of a job, the loss of a home, the loss of a marriage or a relationship, and the list can go on and on. And my hope is that we find some way to reach men in particular, no less so women, but men's. I think the job's bigger with men, to help men understand that one loss impacts another somehow, and we've got to find a way to handle it. And there's an expression that I think sums up a lot of what we're trying to talk about. The expression is a grief shared is a grief lessened. And I firmly believe that. The more I share it, the less heavy it is, the more able I am to handle it.
Yeah, I like that. A grief shared is a grief lessened.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now so that